Robert, how do you create an IVDR quality plan?
That's a good question. Number one, you can't just like try to ad lib it. There's no way to just say, oh, these are the things and just write it down in 5 minutes. I tried doing it in 1 day, then 2 days. When I got to 4 days of writing notes, I was like, maybe this is a little bit bigger task than I planned on tackling. But I put a link in our weekly call for an IVD checklist. So it's almost done. I got like 3 or 4 more lines to finish in the checklist. So it will go out today. So if you register in there, all you got to do is put an email and name, and you'll get the checklist later today. But most of the requirements that people think about that they need to cover in their quality system are covered in Article 10. Article 10, whether it's the MDR or the IVDR, they have a whole bunch of requirements for your quality system must have at least this. And most people are like, well, I have ISO 1345 and I have a certificate, so I'm compliant. They're like, no, you're not. You have table stakes and you can join the club, but you're not ready yet because you have a whole bunch of stuff that needs to be done that's specific to the European Union. And then when you go to the IVDR, there's some special things for the IVDR as well. So even though we have a complete quality system for the MDR, we still have a major project going on making final edits to comply with the IVDR for some of our clients. And one of the things that we did is we just went through Article 10 and said, okay, do we have all these requirements? And there are some things in there that I found as I was creating the checklist, like, we don't even have a form or a procedure or anything for that. And one of the examples I came up with was, I think it's Article 10, subsection 15. It requires that you have liability insurance. But where do you put that in a procedure? Do you have a procedure for liability insurance? Nobody has that. I've never seen a procedure for liability insurance. I've never seen like some place in your in your quality manual where it says you shall have liability insurance. Michelle, have you ever done that before? Okay, and it's required for the MDR too. So it's not unique to the IVDR. It's required in both. But who has it?
So it seems like that's something that you could put in your resources procedure or your requirements for resources procedure, particularly, when you're talking about infrastructure.
Yeah, it could go there. It could go in the quality manual. It could go in a couple of different places, but most companies in the US have liability insurance. So it's not even unique to Europe.
Yeah.
It's just they made it a law in Europe that you shall have this. And they put it in the section for your quality system requirements. So I'm like, I wasn't expecting to see it there. I knew it was in there. I remember reading it. I remember them making a big deal about it because the PIP scandal and all the people that weren't covered for their medical care and the authorized rep that was being sued for their medical bills. But they were like, how can we be responsible? We just reviewed the tech file. They were fraudulent. They lied to us. How can we be responsible for somebody lying to us? But it's a requirement in the quality system section. So Article 10 is the manufacturer shall have these following quality system requirements as a minimum. And number 15 at the bottom is you got to have liability insurance. So I think Marin's suggestion of having it in the resource section, that's a good solution. But that was the whole reason, not that one item, but examples like that are exactly why I created a checklist, because I said, how one company fixes it is not how another company will choose to fix it, but an auditor somewhere along the line has to make sure that it was covered, and they need to write down how it was covered. And so when you're sitting in the hot seat during your IVDR upgrade audit to get your certificate for the IVDR instead of the IVDD, what are you going to tell the auditor? When they say, where's your proof of liability insurance? And like, well, we have liability insurance, or we're getting liability insurance, or whatever they're going to say. It would be nice to also have that covered. Like, here's where it's covered in our quality system that it's required.
Yeah. And Rob, I've also heard of companies that are self-insured because they're, billion-dollar companies, and that got a nonconformity because they didn't have insurance.
Yeah,
like a certificate of insurance.
J&J, nobody's going to insure J&J for their hernia mesh patches. never going to happen. Or sutures, absorbable sutures, never going to happen. They're going to insure themselves and pay out, and they set aside billions of dollars for this and tell investors this is how we're going to cover these lawsuits. But yeah, you have to have liability insurance, but the law was not written for J&J. It was written for everybody else. It was written for the people that won't go out of business.
I have no perspective on how many companies are we talking about that make in vitro diagnostics and sell them in the EU? Tens, hundreds, what?
It's thousands.
Thousands.
Yeah, it's not
thousands of companies make. Wow.
Well, think about simple things. Who has diabetes? A whole lot of people. Who gets pregnant? Whole lot of people. Who has cholesterol? Whole lot of people. Pick your illness. There's a diagnostic test for it. Pick one.
I guess I don't.
What about Quest Diagnostics? All IVD tests.
Yeah, I used to work for IVD. That's how I started in medical devices. And I was amazed because they also sell to each other, to sell out to people. And it's pretty incredible. They're talking small batches of packaging sometimes and millions other times. So it gets interesting to see how to put it all together.
All those COVID tests that everybody had, that's an IVD.
In vitro, in the body? But I guess I don't really understand.
In vivo is in the body. In vitro means outside the body. So we take a specimen. It's either urine, blood, saliva, stools. We even have, believe it or not, software as a medical device as an in vitro diagnostic, because you have bridge software between the lab information systems and the hospital information system. And because it's an accessory to an instrument that's gathering information, it's considered a software as a medical device, IVD. And there's no regulations really to cover it.
The problem was my interpretation of the eye was inside the body. And I was like, how many? And when you said thousands, but okay, now that I am regrounded, thank you.
Yeah. And people sort of cast it aside like, well, I'm not going to worry about IVD because that's not very big. Like, wrong. And that's why the European regulations were so damaging to the MDR, but the IVDR is a bigger problem. Because the IVDR has fewer notified bodies than the MDR, a lot fewer. Not quite an order of magnitude, but a factor of 2. And then in addition to that, you have the number of companies that were reclassifying for the MDR was small. The number of products that are reclassifying for IVDR is huge. We've gone from 20% of the companies requiring a notified body to 80% of the companies requiring a notified body just due to the reclassification laws. So now all those companies that weren't getting CE marking through a notified body and were just self-declaring that, yeah, we meet all the requirements, we promise, we say so. Now it's you shall prove and get a certificate from a notified body and go through that whole process. Well, that hasn't started yet. And I wanted to give a shout out to Michelle. She had this beautiful graph showing how many certificates are expiring in 2024.
All of them.
What a scary, like, if there were time to retire from a notified body, it's 2023.
I call them the 1%ers because a year ago, literally only 1% of MDD certificates had been issued under MDR. It's crazy. So
By the way, I think you both know, but Basile is coming to San Diego, so we'll be able to hang out with him in person.
Cool.
Yeah.
The whole situation for MDR is just staggering how big a problem is coming in 2024. I have no idea how much worse it can get than it already has been, but there's no possible way you can quadruple or even say, it might be as much as 8-fold, but let's assume half the companies say, screw the EU, I'm not doing CE marking anymore. Let's just assume that half of them say we fold. If you have that good of an exodus of companies and half of them say we are not doing CE marking anymore because we can't afford to do this, you still need to increase your resources at notified bodies by 4 times. And how can you multiply your population of trained qualified employees and handle the infrastructure required for that in 18 months? How is that possible? well, we got more like 21 months or something, but 21 months, we're going to increase by fourfold at a notified body. It's not going to happen. It'll never happen. So I don't know what they're going to do.
So Rob, you'll get a kick out of this. I lost some business recently because they went with a consultant that they felt could better guarantee their timeline under MDR. And one of the questions I asked them, have you called a notified body yet? No, they haven't even called anybody yet, but they wanted me to commit that they would have a CE mark in by May of next year. I'm like, oh, I can't even guarantee you're going to get your technical file reviewed by May of next year, no matter how fast I put it together. So somebody, whoever they hired, told them, oh yeah, sure, you can have a CE mark by then for a 2B product software. Yeah, sure.
I have right in my quote that for the CE marking projects, you may not be able to get a quote for CE marking before your target date. And I don't mean for me, I mean for the notified body. The notified body might not be able to quote this before your target date for launching.
Bob, I wonder if you might pull up the checklist and share your screen, because I'm acutely interested in Michelle and Marin and Nellie's perspective, since they all do quality for a living as you. Are there items on this list that you didn't think of? I mean, as everyone knows, I don't do quality. I didn't even understand IVDR well enough as this call began. I'm thinking, if IVDR is such a huge category, it's got to take up a great percentage of quality systems, and therefore anyone doing quality who's worth their salt should know how to do it. And therefore, for those people, the list would be like, yeah.
But I think, to Rob's point, that where the big delta is going to come in is 80% of the companies have never been scrutinized directly by a notified body. So even if they were doing quality before, they weren't getting live feedback, and the expectation and the bar was self-set, not to that of the external reviewers.
Yep. So one of the things I did just to narrow the scope a little bit for myself is, and I hope you can see my screen here.
We can.
Right in the beginning.
May I paraphrase what she said first, just so I understand?
Yeah.
People who are doing IVDRs have never had to deal with a notified body before.
80%.
80% of them deal with a notified body before, and now 60%. They do. No idea what's waiting for them.
There was 20, now it's 80%. So more than half the companies. It was similar, I think, at least my experience was for when we went to MDR, a lot of the class 1 companies had never had to deal with a notified body before.
Yeah. So if you made a scalpel before, and it's a reusable scalpel or forceps or micro scissors, all those reusable instruments were not CE marked by a notified body. They were CE marked by the company, and they said, we're self-declaring, and here's our declaration of conformity. And they put the CE mark on it, but there was no notified body involved. And the way you know is the CE mark doesn't have a number next to it. The number tells you which notified body signed off on it.
Okay. Let me ask you this. If my mom had an IVDR product that is sold in Europe, and she's never talked to a notified body, and I'm like, Mom, you've got to do something right now. Let me put you in touch with Rob or Michelle or people that I know who can help. Is she still, I'm sorry, we can't, like you said, if Mom was your client, you can't even guarantee a technical file. If before we even start, we're guaranteed failure, what do you do?
The best thing you can do to start is get a quote, because it's first come, first serve. Everybody needs it urgently. So you got to get a quote, and you got to commit to a date, and you got to move every mountain you have to hit that date. And so if they give you a date that's October and you think you won't be ready until November, suck it up, Buttercup, because this is your one and only chance. If you get bumped to the end of the line, you just lost not a month, not 2 months, but maybe a year or 2 years. That's how long the line is. So
And Rob, speak a little bit to the conundrum of, all right, for MDR, everybody knows that there's a constraint on notified bodies. We went from like 75 to like 28. But for IVDR or IVD, it was originally what, like 11? And now it's down to how many? 6?
I don't know what the number is, but it's actually tougher than that because you have A, B, C, D IVDs, and not everybody can review all A, B, C, D. So A's, of course, are going to be your ones that are still self-declared, but the B group is the big growth. So most of the notified bodies will be able to handle B, but you've got a lot of companies adding software to things and may suddenly find, due to the way they worded regulations, that, oh, no, you're not a B, you're a C because you're an accessory to a C. And people don't want to hear that. But that's what they found when they do these classification reviews. At the very beginning of the quoting process, the company provides their regulatory classification rationale. And when the notified body looks at it, they often disagree based on guidance that isn't even published yet. There's plenty of guidance out there within these notified bodies for how to classify medical devices, and they had to submit it to the competent authorities during the designation process to get their job as a notified body. Did any of that end up being public? No. So none of the guidelines on how we classify devices and when they end up in B versus C and how we're going to handle these gray areas of classification, all of that had to be spelled out with examples from existing clients to the competent authority as part of the designation process. And it was reviewed and nonconformities were issued. They did re-audits and they finally said, yes, your process is adequate. So the competent authorities agree that the notified bodies are classifying correctly, but none of that information is in a guidance document. So people are just reading the guidance or reading the regulations and saying, oh, I looked at the classification rules and this is where we fit. But they don't have a guidance document telling us how to classify these B devices. First of all, the classification rules didn't exist before. They created brand new classifications, A, B, C, D, instead of 1, 2, 2, 3, whatever it is. We got whole new classifications. And we have all new little tiny footnotes about software. And everybody wants software now. Everybody wants to have it connected to their smartphone and email the data to their doctor and kept in some sort of MDSS software system that didn't exist before. And I put right in the scope here because I knew it would be a problem. The existing system is already compliant with IVD directive. That's an assumption. And as Michelle was saying, it's probably a faulty assumption for half of our clients.
Rama notes that there were 22 notified bodies for IVDD, and now there are 6 for IVDR.
So that's bad. We went from 84 to 24 for the MDR, but it took years to drop that down.
If the bottleneck is through the notified bodies and people have quotes and the date arrives where they're not in compliance, what other body is there to say, okay, take all of your products off the market today? And you come back and you say, wait, I'm in line. I mean, this notified body. What teeth are in this thing?
Oh, there's lots of teeth. So number one, you can't get it through customs because it's not marked with the CE plus a notified body number. That's number one problem. Number two, your importer has to certify that they have reviewed your documentation and your labeling and said it's adequate. You don't have CE mark yet? Sorry, it's not adequate. I can't import
They
it.
really are out of business.
Yeah. And the distributor is responsible for it as well. And the authorized representative whose name and address are on your label, they have to certify to it. So if any one of those, the importer, the distributor, or authorized representative determine that your labeling or your technical file is not compliant, they're required by law to report it to the competent authority.
And so here's a good kick in the pants is like, even if you manage to stay in a MD in a state that does not require negotiation with a notified body, the authorized representatives are now auditing your technical documentation as if they are notified bodies because they are responsible for it too. Yep. And so I've got like a class 1 client that's just basically a performance garment that has some medical claims that got put through the ringer by their authorized representative and scrutinized in a way that I don't even think a notified body would have.
Absolutely. I've seen some that do a very cursory review. They give you a checklist, and then they'll say it should take us about 2 hours to review this technical documentation. Well, I've just handed you 1,000 pages of documentation. You're going to spend 2 hours reviewing it. Okay, that's a pencil whip exercise. But then you have the story that Michelle's talking about, where it was more thorough than the notified body that took 90 days and charged me 30 grand. That we have both extremes we're seeing out there. And so which one is doing the right job? Well, probably the one that did the Michelle's review there was being a little overzealous because they saw an opportunity to make a bunch of money. And the other one was just trying to keep their existing clients happy and doing pencil whipping and hoping will be enough. The one that went overboard, unfortunately, will probably set the bar for everybody else, because the competent authority is like, yeah, this is what we wanted authorized reps to do. And then the one that's pencil whipping will get major nonconformities, and they'll be in jeopardy of losing their status as an authorized representative. And the one that I was referring to that did the pencil whip exercise, they were Amerigo. They're the largest. And they have a whole consulting arm. And because a lot of this review gets outsourced to subcontractors and consultants, it very well could be that Michelle's talking about Amerigo also. So it could have been the same authorized representative being inconsistent, where it's a pencil whip exercise for one and it's a thorough audit for the other. And it's just two different subcontractors handling it differently. And Amerigo's just handing out quotes to try to keep everybody happy.
Rob, I see your plan is 7 pages.
Yeah, this is actually a draft. The final version that's got a few more lines is actually upstairs, but this is what I had access to on this computer.
Okay.
But
I have a question. Could you just do your manufacturing in Europe itself and then cut down the paperwork that is required? I mean, I went through this, exactly what you're talking about at POC. Now I'm doing her ADX, and I'm just wondering, would that cut down the time?
It cuts down certain layers of review and approval. So if you're already located in the European Union as a manufacturer, you don't have an importer. You don't need an authorized representative. You still need to do some of the things that they need to do, but you don't have to have an importer label or identify an importer because you're already there. And you don't have to have an authorized representative because you're already there. But you still need to register with all the member states, just like the authorized rep would have done for you. So you might still choose, even if you're in Europe, that rather than learn how to use the new UDAMED system and register myself, I think I'm going to hire Americo to do it for me anyway. So I have European clients that are using authorized reps anyway. But in theory, it cuts out those two, but it doesn't make any difference to the European notified body. So you still have to use a notified body, and that's the biggest obstacle of all.
So does it matter which country European body you use, or it doesn't matter?
If you only have 6 to choose from, what are your options? Whatever one will give me a quote.
And it's qualified at all to look at my documentation.
Yeah, if you have a C or a D, the list might be 3.
Sanjeev, is this conversation going to affect you directly?
Yeah, it will. It will. And that's what will decide whether I go into Europe first or whether I go into Asia first, right?
Well, I think they just decided for you.
I don't know what Michelle's telling people, but I've been telling people since 2014, Europe should be your last market now that the MDR and IVDR have come.
Yep, I say the same thing.
That's what I've been saying as well.
That's what I thought.
And people are now saying, wow, that's a fundamental shift in what we recommend to companies for their first market launch. We've been telling people for 25 years. I'm like, you've been telling people for 25 years. I've been telling people for 8 years, don't do that.
Right. I'm a part of a lot of different angel investing networks, and I speak a lot to investors. And I cannot tell you how many times I've seen a pitch and an investor who did this 20 years ago. Oh, I had this great exit in Europe. Why aren't you going to Europe first? And I'm like, that's not a thing anymore. Like,
I will agree.
2000 called and wants its regulatory strategy back. And so I will call out, investors to the carpet all the time. I'm like, you don't know what you're talking about. And you're telling these people who want your money a bad strategy that's going to cost you to lose your money.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. They didn't even have the translation requirements back then. If it was in English, it's good enough to ship it. Now it's you got to have all 21 languages up on your website and available just in case somebody wants it. And you need that before you can launch. Like, you got to be kidding me.
So should
Yeah.
all patients leave Europe because there'll be no devices to help them anymore? David, I know a watering hole in Redmond that would love to have you back.
I gotta believe that they're gonna have to come up with some way of dealing with this in 2024 for the MDR. But
You mean a
will the,
postponement?
I don't know. They've postponed before. Will they do that? Everybody's saying, oh yeah, they'll postpone, but they're saying no, they won't. These certificates expire. What are you gonna do? I mean, the big companies in theory should have their CE marking locked in. So will it just be big companies? All small companies will go out of business or leave Europe? I don't know.
Well, I've even heard stuff like even Nestle is killing 20% of their product line because even for Nestle, it's not worth it.
Yeah.
So,
Well, yeah, the number of products that have been taken off the Declaration of Conformities is staggering. If it's getting to the Henry Ford mantra of, you can have whatever color you want as long as it's black. So you can have whatever size you want as long as it's for French. I don't care what size your artery is. You're getting for French. I mean, it's not quite that bad yet, but it's getting really close.
Scroll a little bit. Let's see more of your.
Yeah, so essentially it's all the same format. It has these 4 columns. So the requirements on the left, the document that we have in our quality system is listed here in green. So you would substitute whatever the document is in your quality system. And then this column, I say what to look for. And then this column, you write in what you found. And so if you didn't find something, you write a nonconformity. If you said it's not applicable, you explain why it's not applicable. And if you found it conforming, you would explain what evidence you gathered. But what we're going to see a lot of times in that column is they have a procedure, they have no records. And they only have a procedure that you have to check carefully to see if the ink is dry still.
If I were to engage your company and you said, Joe, I need you to use FRM 039, a declaration of conformity, and I have some paperwork. You said, well, you put it into our form. Is that some intern on your team's manual entry?
Usually that's correct. Usually it's manual data entry into a form or template. Companies buy templates, companies write templates, but almost every company out there has a declaration of conformity template, and authorized representatives give them away. Notified bodies give them away. They want the declaration of conformity happens to be one of those things where anybody can find a template for it. Same thing with the essential requirements checklist or GSPR checklist. You can find checklists all over the place for those.
Anything in your second column there, but you said that these are yours. So
so
things that you designed as a kind of.
Our company wrote all these procedures and has all these forms, and so they're available on our website. You can either, like if it's an SYS, there's a hyperlink on our website, and you can go purchase it there, and it lists on that page what forms and lists go with it.
So Rob, the left column? This is essentially a list of all the IVDR requirements, correct?
Yep. Yeah, and in Article 10 is where a big chunk of them are, but I'm making some final stuff on the annexes now, because that's where a lot of hidden things are found.
Okay.
I think one important thing is that it's 7 pages, and this is the best he can do from what's actually in writing already. This isn't how we have no idea yet how these things are going to actually be audited and what the expectation around their execution is. Same thing with the MDR.
Like this right here. So they've been saying, if we're not happy with the ISO standards, we'll create common specifications of our own that'll be specific to Europe for each product family.
Which makes no sense because ISO standards gets harmonized in Europe in the first place. Yeah. So if they don't agree, don't harmonize it.
They could do that, or they could just come up with a common specification because they don't like how quickly the harmonization is going. So it was a back
They don't
order,
have
like,
to sit at the table with the rest of the world that's on the technical committees that may have different opinions than the European Union about what the product performance should do.
that's exactly it. They created it. If we don't like it, we'll be narcissistic and we'll take our ball in our bat and we'll go home.
Which is their,
and this is
their
only
right.
the EU. The England and stuff have their own things that they're doing.
And took their ball and bat and went home.
Yeah, and there's several countries that are doing that, so it's
Switzerland,
going to be
yep.
really awful.
Iceland, I think
I wanna
Iceland's on the
bring-
list too.
I want to bring Jose and,
It's global disharmonization.
and Paul into the conversation from each of your different perspectives as a manufacturer, as an engineer, as a supply chain expert. Any one of you choose to come off mute and say, how will this affect your business? Orcas?
It's above my pay grade on the quality and regulatory side, which is why we've got a quality and regulatory director. But I mean, I haven't seen it impact our business from what we do in product development, because our clients generally are the ones who would be responsible for this sort of thing. But you know, we've got a person in house who's making sure that on our end we're doing what we need to do.
Mm-hmm. Eddie?
Well, as a matter of fact, just this week, we've passed through our stage 1 audit of our QMS with our European notified body.
Mm-hmm. Who do you
So
use?
we're using a group in Italy called ECM. The tricky bit is that we chose to work with them a bit like what Michelle was describing. A year ago, we went through this whole procedure. We chose them in part because our development partner already works with them, so we've got a bit in. They themselves have not yet received their own approval from the Italian Ministry of Health. It's been through every other stage. They've had their audit. They've all been in it. But so we're the QMS bit we can do beforehand. So hopefully it keeps us on the momentum with them. But and ours is a class 2B device. So you know, our previous generation had been CE marked already. So we got a little bit of momentum on that side of things, which is okay. But I've heard separately that Smiths Medical, massive company, they're actually, again, packing up their toys and going home. Do not break a hip and try to get it replaced in Europe, because there will be no Smiths Medical hips available in Europe within about like between 6 and 18 months.
I'm wondering if stock market investors will be savvy enough to track who's leaving markets. So whomever is left in the hip replacement, and it's the only one in Europe, they should have some pretty nice year-over-year growth.
Yeah, but what's interesting is I was at the JP Morgan conference virtually this year, and virtually no one is talking about it at that level. So I do wonder how many analysts are actually telling their investors. Yeah.
I wonder how many analysts are even informed enough to realize that this is happening and the impact.
Right.
Yeah.
I think everybody's in denial that it won't happen.
Remember how good all those economists were at spotting that financial crash? Yeah, they were the same banks who were giving all of the
subprime mortgages.
The subprime mortgages, exactly.
Right. Oh, I just watched that last night, The Big Short. It's funny that you bring that up, because I literally was just thinking, there's, you should be shorting the medical device industry with this, with what's coming up.
Shame on you, Nelly.
Or you could go for the investing in all the companies that get their MDR certificates.
Oh, you could, yeah. My problem is I wouldn't know how to short anything if I tried, but it was just one of the things as I was sitting and thinking, if I was a real asshole, that's what I would do. Excuse me, am I allowed to say that?
This is the time for me to, as host of this call, to say, nothing we say on this call is to be interpreted as financial advice. Please consult your financial advisor before making any investment decisions. D'Souza.
Yeah.
You have a place in the Netherlands that does some business. How is all this going to affect you?
It's
tell the folks at home what you're doing in the Netherlands.
Yeah, I don't know specifically if we're doing anything yet with products, but this entire conversation was really eye-opening for me, because I get a lot of new products coming on, and I got to start asking questions. Have they gone through this entire process? Because when they come to us, they're much further along, right? They've decided Europe or Asia, right? Or they've gone through Asia and like it's finally time to come to Europe. So this is very early for us to get involved. But the good news
Everyone on the
is,
call appreciates what you do. Can you give some context?
oh yeah, so we are an FDA certified contract manufacturer in the Silicon Valley, and we
You're FDA registered.
FDA registered. Thank
What
you.
did he say?
He said certified.
Yeah, okay.
It's under my this guy Joe did our website, and it's under
Oh,
the
shut up. Go on.
certification page.
There's no mistake on that on your site. Go on.
But anyways, so we are what Michelle just said. We help companies do product assembly, warehousing, fulfillment, returns management, and if it's appropriate, we do a lot of repairs and refurbish. We do the for
Which
medical
you and Jan are
devices
going to talk about on the 29th of April.
So what?
You and Jan are going to talk about returns management at the end
Yeah,
of the
Jan, we need to get to know each other so we can plan that presentation. But yeah, I guess all the products you're talking about, they need the logistics, right? What I think about this is I had no idea it was so complex, and it's really a good qualifying question for me to start addressing, because I've had people that I've met here on this group wanted to already talk about it, and you should be talking about logistics and supply chain, but it was too early. They hadn't got the product ready and gone past prototyping and things like that. So very informative for me. Thank you. I didn't know it was this complex.
Robert, if you continue with your complex list here, you're on page 3.
For anybody that isn't familiar with auditing, one of the requirements for filling out a checklist like this is you actually need to be able to read this little bit here and understand what that means. So this is not for somebody that's not trained as an auditor and has no familiarity with the IVDR. This is intended for somebody like Michelle or myself or Maren to go out and do a desktop audit or an on-site audit of their documentation. But when we hear, oh, you got to make sure you're meeting the requirements of Article 18, we got to know where to find Article 18. We got to be able to read Article 18 quickly and know, oh yeah, that's what I'm looking for.
You could almost make a sub checklist for every single one of these items in the checklist.
And people do, and they try to maintain that.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, don't do that. It'll never stay that way.
But on the other hand, the companies need to understand and need to be able to show themselves that they've met all the individual clauses.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of a pain to have to look at all of that, but is there another way that companies can effectively show that they've met all the details?
Actually, let me show another example. I'll just pick my procedure for auditing.
Maren and Nelly, do you have something equivalent to what Rob is showing us here that you use for your clients, or has this not come up yet?
So for most of my clients, in all honesty, they look at the European and they're like, I don't even want to think about it right now. It's just too overwhelming. They've all focused on FDA. Now I do have a ton of checklists, but because my clients haven't decided to go EU, I've just kind of focused more on, the market that they're in, which is FDA.
And Maren?
USA.
Very similar. The last client I had that was going to the EU with the new product was under MDD. So we created a very similar checklist for MDD, did a traceability to make sure that all of the MDD requirements were met.
Mhm.
I largely used, so there's different versions of the ISO 13485 standard. There's an EU version of the standard as well, which has a number of additions in the front because the EU needed to add some stuff. So I just included traceability to all of those clauses and then did a check against the MDD, and that pretty much covered everything.
Mhm.
I have not done IVDR, and when I had the same experience as Nelly when we looked at the MDR for clients, particularly with the startup companies. Like, now we're just going to go US for now, and then we'll worry about MDR later.
Nelly, by the way, is our hostess next week. She's going to talk about how to conduct a root cause analysis. Rob, you have a 9-pager up now. What are we looking at?
this is the quality auditing procedure we have. And one of the things that we started adding to all our procedures is color coding and cross references to clause requirements. So the clause in 1345, 8.2.4, paragraph 5, this section meets that requirement. So instead of asking an auditor to do that repetitive lookup every single time they do an audit, we're embedding it right in the procedure. And this is just for 1345. Now we're doing it for the IVDR, we're doing it for the MDR. And so we use different colors for different regulations, and we use symbols for the people that are colorblind. So you can do a search in a find and search for the symbol. So if it's a hashtag or it's an @ sign or it's a $sign, you do a quick search for that, and it pops up all the requirements. And you say, oh, this is the auditing procedure. Here's all the requirements for the IVDR. And here's the technical file procedure. Here's all the requirements. So that's how we're trying to do it. But it's a massive undertaking to do that for one regulation. When you add on a second regulation, it starts to make the procedures more complicated than they really should be, because you start seeing a rainbow of colors.
Yeah, you know, Rob, I actually stopped doing that because of the rainbow of colors, the complexity. I started, you know, I've been brainstorming just putting a trace matrix where, you know, you like have a note and it says this section meets these sections, like an appendix to the document. Because it seems like now you're getting more focused on all the regulations and standards. You might as well just have your procedure be that instead of a procedure anymore.
Yeah, I take this same approach. I actually do separate tables for each of the regulations that need to be met, because it's not only medical. If you've dealt with SBIR grants or companies that have to meet SBIR grant requirements, particularly around supplier selection, that's way more complicated than the medical, because you have to consider you know, small business owners and minority businesses and all kinds of other stuff. So I try to set up the system first, because there's not a lot of really complicated stuff in the medical requirements. If you're setting up a good solid business system, I find that you cover most of those. And then just in the background, the regulatory people can go through and just make sure all the details are checked. And I find updating those tables, like if you go from one version of 13485 to the next version of 13485, it's pretty easy to do the gap assessment then, because I've got all the traceability to what's there and what's been created. If you're adding a new country, then you can look at their regulations and go, oh yeah, it's same requirement. I've already got it covered in these procedures. So it's similar to what you're doing in the internal audit, but like Michelle, I do it as a separate.
So one thing I do is I don't get down to the nitty gritty detail on it. What I do is so my QMS risk assessment, each procedure has its own, and it's an appendix. And in that appendix, it lists all the regulatory elements that are being covered in the procedure. And then you do your risk assessment based on those standards that you've referenced in your procedure. So that's just been I try to keep it simple, because otherwise clients get overwhelmed when they go to read it. I don't know.
You have clients that actually read it.
Unfortunately,
Okay.
those
Lucky.
You can ask Chad. I'm pretty insistent that they read them.
Yeah, I've had problems where we had the requirement in the procedure. We had it in a clause traceability matrix that was separate. We had an audit report that said it was there and where it was. And the auditor insisted, I can't find it. Here's your nonconformity. And it was another body auditor that I happen to know. And I know they're pretty decent. I think what's happening is with the new MD SAP audits, which a lot of companies are going through, the emphasis has gone away from actually knowing the regulations to filling out a regulatory checklist. And if you don't spoon feed them every single thing and make it easy for them, they just hand out the nonconformities. And I'm like, it is there. That's not a correct nonconformity. And they refused to revise the report. They said, no, I couldn't find it. So it's your burden to make it easier for me to find.
Then you have to do a root cause analysis on why they couldn't find it and a corrective action on where, I mean, it's stupid.
Yeah, or they'll say, well, maybe the person that is the quality manager should be more well-trained so they can explain it to me, because I don't know your quality system. I'm just auditing it.
You know, on the outside, Rob, you're this warm, cuddly bear of a guy, but inside you're stewing all of this stuff that scares the bejesus out of people. It's like you're a Trojan horse of badness.
You know, that Rob's experience, I went through a notified body audit, and I was flabbergasted that they, you know, the audit went well, but when I got the report back, and then when I did my root cause analysis, they're not doing the standard approach to root cause anymore. They want to get it down to, you have unqualified people. Literally every single nonconformance, that's what they wanted for root cause. And it was like, and because of MDR and because of MDSAP, my clients like, I'm not in those markets. They yanked it. They're like, I'm not going to deal with this. This is ridiculous. So it's like they're not reasonable anymore.
They're definitely not reasonable. And even if you tell a client, this is what BSI or this is what TUV is going to look for when they come to audit your technical file, they're in denial and will not believe you. They'll say you're just trying to pad your consulting bill. They'll fire you. Go find somebody that's cheaper or try to do it themselves, and then get the nonconformity report that's worse than you predicted. And they won't come back and thank you. They'll just say, screw Europe.
No, I feel like what Europe's like amputating themselves as a market.
Amputating themselves.
Well, I mean, every client I have had, and it's not by my advice, it's like, it's not worth the money. It's not worth the investment. I don't even know if I have a market there.
Well, and it's beyond just, did you meet a requirement? It's like, did you meet somebody's opinion?
Oh my God, that's it. And that's what when I train auditors, I say, you're not to write your opinion, but notified bodies, it is their opinion. It's not. Michelle nailed it on the head. I think we're done.
Well, I tell my clients that are going through these MDSAP and C marking audits, I'm like, you probably want somebody from our team that actually wrote the procedure in the meeting during the audit, because otherwise you got to know where all this stuff is found and under the stress of an audit. We're used to audit, so we relax. This is where it is.
Yeah, and somebody that can turn it around on the auditor and say, know the difference between an opinion and a requirement, and say, okay, I understand that your understanding or opinion of it, but where did that requirement come from? And where did your interpretation of that requirement come from?
Rob, how many employees do you have now?
We have 9, soon to be 8, because the person that was supposed to join us today, Mary, she's resigned. She's going to go take a sales job.
Really?
Wow. Is she going to sell products to Europe?
Not regulated ones.
I exchanged texts with John Spear this week, and he told me that ever since that major investment into his company, that they can hardly keep up with how much business they are generating. So I know that factoid would be of interest to a number of people on this call. I don't think there's an appropriate way to wrap up this call. There's just so much outstanding and frightening that I think I'm just going to go take a minute.
I think the appropriate end phrase would be, that's not all, folks.
No, there's always one more thing in the auditing world. So just download the checklist. You register it, I'll send it out today. And as the other experts on the phone here today said, every single line item I wrote could be its own list.
It sounds to me as though when you and Michelle give your workshop about regulatory therapy, that somebody needs to lay on the couch for this part.
Yeah.
For sure.
We weren't sure whether it would be the auditor or the client.
Thank you for joining us today, folks. Rob, thanks as always.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Okay, bye.
All right.